Dr. Harold Voss slammed Emma Richardson's medical file onto the nurse's station counter so hard that the clipboard beneath it cracked. "Pull the plug," he said, not even lowering his voice. "She's been unresponsive for 6 weeks. The baby won't survive without a matching donor, and there isn't one. This is a waste of this hospital's resources." Nurse Patricia Huang stared at him, her mouth open. "Dr. Voss, she's 31 years old. She's a vegetable." He cut her off, already turning away. "And that infant is dying. I'm filing the paperwork tonight." Nobody in that hallway moved. Nobody dared, because nobody knew that a 32-year-old man named Ethan Carter was about to walk through the wrong door and change absolutely everything. If this story already has your heart pounding, please hit that subscribe button right now and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Ethan Carter was not a man who believed in fate. He believed in showing up and doing the right thing when it was right in front of you, and in minding his own business every other time. He was an electrician from Southeast Portland, the kind of guy who drove a 10-year-old pickup truck with a crack in the windshield he kept meaning to fix and never did. He paid his bills on time, called his mother every Sunday, and had exactly one best friend worth keeping, Mike Dalton, who played pickup basketball on Tuesday nights at the East Side Recreation Center, despite being, by his own admission, the least athletic person in the Pacific Northwest. So when Mike texted him at 8:15 that evening, "Bro sprained my ankle bad. At St. Mary's ER. Bring snacks." Ethan grabbed a bag of pretzels from his kitchen cabinet, climbed into the truck, and drove to the hospital without a second thought. That was who Ethan was. You called, he came. Simple as that. Street. Mary's Hospital sat on the eastern edge of the city, 12 stories of pale brick and fluorescent light. Ethan had been there exactly twice before, once when his mother had her gallbladder out, and once when he sliced his hand open on a live wire and needed 8 stitches. Both times he had found the place disorienting. Too many corridors, too many identical gray doors, too many signs pointing in directions that somehow all felt wrong. Tonight was no different. He took the elevator to the 3rd floor, the way the front desk volunteer had told him, turn left at the nurses' station, and then made the mistake of following a man in scrubs who happened to be walking at a purposeful clip and looked to Ethan like someone who knew where they were going. He did not know where they were going. The man in scrubs turned a corner, pushed through a set of double doors, and disappeared. Ethan found himself standing in a long, quiet corridor he did not recognize. The signs on the wall said, "ICU West Wing." He pulled out his phone to call Mike and get directions. No signal. He muttered under his breath, turned around, and nearly walked straight into a cart of medical equipment being wheeled by a young nursing assistant who looked like she was about 17 years old. "Sorry," Ethan said, stepping aside. "I'm trying to find the ER. I think I went the wrong way." The girl pointed back the way she'd come. "Down the hall, take the stairs to 2, then follow the green line on the floor." "Green line?" Ethan repeated. "Got it, thank you." But he started back, and then he passed room 317. The door was not fully latched. It had drifted open maybe 3 inches, just enough that the light from inside fell in a thin wedge across the hallway floor. Ethan walked past it. He took 3 steps, then he stopped. He didn't know why he stopped. He couldn't explain it then, and he never fully could afterward. Something made him stop. A sound, maybe? Or the absence of sound. The room beyond that door was so quiet it almost had weight to it. The kind of quiet that made the air feel different. He turned back and looked through the woman in the bed was young. That was the first thing he noticed. Young and very still, with dark hair fanned out across the pillow and both hands lying open at her sides like she had simply forgotten to close them. Machines surrounded her. A ventilator. IV lines. A monitor displaying her heartbeat in slow, steady green peaks. She looked peaceful, and she looked wrong, the way someone looks when they are somewhere their body is, but their self is not. On the table beside her bed, someone had placed a small frame photograph. Ethan could just barely make it out from where he stood, a man and a woman laughing at the camera, caught mid-joy, squinting into bright sunlight. He should have kept walking. He knew that. He was not supposed to be in this corridor, let alone looking into someone's private room. But his hand was already on the door, and before he had consciously decided anything, he had pushed it open and stepped inside. "Hey," he said softly, which was an absurd thing to say to a woman in a coma. He was aware of that. He said it anyway. I'm sorry, wrong room, I'll get out of your way. She didn't move. Of course she didn't. Ethan stood there for a moment. He looked at her hands. He looked at the photograph. And then, without understanding why, without any reason that he could have articulated to another human being, he started to sing. It was "You Are My Sunshine," his grandmother's song. Mabel Carter had sung it to him every single time he was sick as a child, every time he had a nightmare, every time the world felt too large and too loud and too much. She had been gone for 4 years, and he still couldn't hear that song without feeling the specific pressure of her hand on top of his head. His voice was not a good voice. He would be the first to say so. It was a little rough and a little unsteady and completely unpolished. But it was real. It was the most real thing in that room. "You are my sunshine," he sang quietly, barely above a whisper. "My only sunshine, you make me happy when skies are gray." He got through 4 bars before he saw it. Her fingers moved. The smallest possible movement, the ring finger of her left hand curling inward, just slightly, just once, like a reflex, like something trying to reach. Ethan stopped breathing. He stared at her hand. He waited. "You'll never know, dear," he sang again, his voice breaking, "how much I love you." Her eyelids moved, not opening, not yet, but flickering the way eyes do in a dream when something is calling you back from very far away. "Please don't take my sunshine away." Ethan was not a man who cried easily. He had been raised by a man who considered emotion a private matter, and a woman who expressed it sideways through food and efficiency and showing up. He had cried at his grandfather's funeral, and once embarrassingly at the end of a movie about a dog. That was the full inventory. He was crying now. He had no idea when it had started. "Keep singing," a voice said from the doorway. He spun around. A nurse was standing there. The badge said Patricia Huang RN, and her expression was something he had never seen before on a stranger's face. It was the expression of someone watching something they were afraid to believe. "Don't stop," Patricia said, stepping into the room. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Her fingers moved. "I saw it from the doorway. Don't stop." I'm not supposed to be here," Ethan said. "I was looking for the ER. My friend sprained his ankle." "Sir." Patricia's eyes were locked on Emma. "Please keep singing." He turned back to the bed. His throat was tight and his heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his jaw. He took a breath. He started again from the beginning. He had sung through the song twice more when Emma Richardson opened her eyes. It was not dramatic in the way that waking up is dramatic in movies. There was no gap, no sudden sitting up, no moment of cinematic clarity. Her eyes opened slowly the way a door opens when the hinges are stiff. She stared at the ceiling. Then by degrees she turned her head. She looked at Ethan. He looked at her. "Hi," he said, because he still didn't know what else to say. Her lips moved. No sound came out, not with the ventilator tube. But he could read it plain and simple, the way you can sometimes read something without knowing how you know how. She said, "Where am I?" And then the room exploded. Patricia had already hit the call button. Within 40 seconds, there were 3 nurses, a respiratory therapist, and a physician's assistant crowding through the door. Ethan was pushed gently but firmly toward the wall. Someone said, "Ma'am, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." Someone else was on a radio calling for Dr. Stevens. Machines were being checked, readings called out, a flashlight swept across Emma's eyes. Ethan pressed his back against the wall and watched it all happen and felt like he had fallen into someone else's life by accident. A hand touched his arm. It was Patricia. She had stepped away from the controlled chaos at the bed and was looking at him with an expression that mixed wonder with something very close to urgency. "What's your name?" she asked. Ethan Carter. I was visiting my friend." "I know," she said. "I know, but I need you to stay. The doctor is going to want to talk to you. Can you stay?" "Is she going to be okay?" he asked. Patricia looked back at the bed where Emma was now tracking movement with her eyes, where someone was carefully removing the ventilator tube, where a woman was coming back from somewhere very far away. "I don't know yet," Patricia said honestly, "but something is happening that wasn't happening 20 minutes ago. And you were the only thing that changed." Dr. Nathaniel Stevens arrived in 4 minutes. Ethan counted. The man was in his late 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. He stood in the doorway of room 317 and looked at Emma Richardson and went very still. Then he looked at Ethan. "Who are you?" he asked, not unkindly. "Wrong room," Ethan said. It was becoming his answer for everything. Stevens almost smiled, almost. "Tell me exactly what happened. From the beginning." Ethan told him. The wrong corridor, the open door, the quiet, the singing. He felt profoundly stupid describing it. He was a 32-year-old electrician who had wandered into an ICU room and sung a children's song to an unconscious woman. When he said it out loud, it sounded like the setup for a joke. But Stevens wasn't laughing. Stevens was listening the way doctors listen when they're building something in their minds, fact by fact assembling a picture. "The song," Stevens said. "You said it was something your grandmother sang to you, Ian." "Yeah, You Are My Sunshine. She sang it whenever I was sick. Or scared, I guess." Has anyone told you anything about this patient's history?" "Nothing. I don't know her. I don't know who she is." Stevens was quiet for a moment. He looked at Emma, who was now breathing on her own, whose eyes were open and tracking, who was not yet speaking, but was present in a way she had not been for 6 weeks. Then he looked back at Ethan. "Her name is Emma Richardson," Stevens said. "She's been in a medically induced coma since a car accident 7 weeks ago. Her husband was killed in that accident." He paused. "She was also 8 weeks pregnant at the time of the crash." Ethan felt the floor shift under him. "She's the baby?" "The baby survived," Stevens said. "A girl, born by emergency C-section the night of the accident at 29 weeks. She's been in the NICU this whole time." His voice was careful and measured. "There are complications. With the infant. I'll explain more when I can, but right now I need you to understand something, Mr. Carter." "Okay." "In 6 weeks, this woman has shown no meaningful neurological response to any stimuli. None. We've had music therapy voice recordings, her mother reading aloud her sister. Nothing." He stopped. "You walked in here and sang one song and she woke up. I don't know what to do with that medically, but I know it happened. I watched the monitor. Her brain activity shifted before Nurse Huang even got to the doorway. Whatever you did." He stopped again, and Ethan realized with a shock that this composed, silver-haired physician was struggling. "Whatever you did, it worked." Ethan sat down on the chair in the corner because his legs had stopped cooperating. "I didn't do anything," he said. "I just sang the wrong song in the wrong room." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Stevens said quietly. And then, because he was a doctor and doctors don't linger in metaphysics when there are things to be done, he straightened up and said, "I need to ask you to wait outside while we complete our assessment. But please don't leave. There's something I need to discuss with you, and I need you to hear it." Something in his voice made the hair on Ethan's arm stand up. "What kind of something?" Ethan asked. Stevens looked at him for a long moment. "The kind," he said, "that involves whether a 7-week-old infant lives or dies." Ethan didn't move for a moment. He just sat there staring at the doctor, and the words landed in him slowly, the way a stone sinks through water level by level. "I'll wait," he said. He sat in the hallway on a plastic chair under fluorescent lights while the hospital moved around him. Nurses passed, an orderly wheeled a cart. Somewhere down the corridor, someone was crying softly, the kind of crying that had been going on a long time and still wasn't finished. Ethan held the bag of pretzels he had brought for Mike and did not eat any of them, and forgot entirely that Mike existed. He pulled out his phone. 2 bars of signal out here. He stared at the screen. He didn't call anyone. There was nothing he could say that would make sense to another person right now. And anyway, some moments are so strange that sharing them immediately feels like breaking something. His grandmother's voice moved through his memory, clear as water. "You are my sunshine." She had held his hand when he said it always. Even when he was 14 and thought he was too old for it. She had held his hand anyway. He wondered if Emma Richardson had ever heard that song. He wondered about a 7-week-old baby in the NICU, small enough to fit in a man's 2 hands, fighting with everything she had for a life she'd barely started. He wondered what Dr. Stevens had meant. Patricia Huang came out into the hallway at one point, not to speak to him, but she stopped when she saw him still sitting there. She looked at the bag of pretzels. Something in her face softened. "You didn't leave," she said. "He asked me to wait." "A lot of people would have left anyway." Ethan shrugged. "I said I'd wait." She nodded slowly. Then she said, "She's stable, Emma. She's stable and she's responding." She recognized her own name. She can't really talk yet. Her throat is raw from the ventilator. But she's there. She tapped at the side of her temple. She's there. That's good, Ethan said, and it felt like the most inadequate sentence he had ever spoken. It's more than good, Patricia said, and she looked at him with that expression again, the one he couldn't quite categorize, like someone trying to figure out where a person fits into a story that didn't seem to have a place for them until just now. Mr. Carter, do you have a family here? Someone you can call? I have a friend in the ER, he said. Sprained ankle. She almost smiled. That's how it goes sometimes. You come in for one thing. He almost smiled back. Yeah. The door to room 317 opened, and Dr. Stevens had stepped out. He looked at Ethan and then at Patricia, and Patricia gave a small nod and stepped away, giving them space. Stevens sat down in the chair next to Ethan. Not across from him, not standing over him, next to him, the way someone sits when what they're about to say is heavy enough to require sitting down together. Emma's going to need time, he said, but she's back. Cognitively, she's back. That's genuinely extraordinary, Mr. Carter. I need you to know that. I have been a physician for 26 years, and I have never seen anything like what happened tonight. Okay, Ethan said carefully. Now I need to tell you about the baby. Stevens laced his fingers together and looked at his hands. Her name is Lily. Emma named her before the coma. We found the paperwork her husband had filed with the hospital administration, so we knew. Lily. She was born at 29 weeks, and she has been in the NICU since the night of the accident. He paused. She has a condition called diamond black fan anemia. It's rare. It means her body can't produce red blood cells properly. Without treatment, it's fatal. Ethan's chest went tight. What's the treatment? A bone marrow transplant. Specifically, she needs a matched donor. We've been searching the registry for 7 weeks. Stevens looked up. We have not found a match. The words sat between them. The silence stretched. Her mother, Ethan said slowly. Emma. Emma is not a match. Her father, her husband, was also tested before the accident as part of routine prenatal screening. Not a match either. The extended family has been tested. Siblings, cousins, her parents. No match. Stevens's voice was completely steady. Now the steadiness of a man who had delivered news like this enough times to know that falling apart himself didn't help anyone. Without a matched donor, Lily will not survive past 3 months. We have perhaps 6 to 8 weeks left in that window. Ethan realized his hands were gripping the bag of pretzels so hard that they were crumbling inside the packaging. He made himself loosen his grip. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Stevens looked at him directly. Because when you came into this hospital tonight, the front desk ran your ID as part of standard visitor protocol. Your name went into the system. He stopped. Mr. Carter, we ran a preliminary compatibility screen against Lily's profile. It's something we do automatically now for every new entry into the hospital system because we've been searching for so long and we're running out of time. Another pause. You're a potential match. The hallway noise continued around them, oblivious. Somewhere a phone rang. Somewhere a door opened and closed. The world kept going at its ordinary pace while Ethan Carter sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights and felt everything in his life rearrange itself around a single sentence. How potential, he said. Significant enough that we need to do a full workup immediately, Stevens said. Significant enough that I am sitting here telling you this instead of sending a letter. Because we don't have time for letters. He leaned forward slightly. I can't make you do anything. You have every right to stand up and walk out of here and never come back, and I will respect that completely. But I need you to understand what I'm telling you. A 7-week-old baby girl is dying. Her mother just woke up from a 6-week coma and doesn't know yet. And you, a man who had no reason whatsoever to be in this corridor tonight, may be the only person on this planet who can save Lily Richardson's life. Ethan did not say anything for a long time. He thought about his grandmother's hands, always warm, always steady. He thought about a photograph on a bedside table, 2 people laughing into the sun, not knowing what was coming. He thought about a baby so small she could fit in his palms, fighting in an incubator down some hallway he hadn't walked yet, in a part of this hospital he didn't know existed until 4 minutes ago. He thought about how he had taken a wrong turn and walked through an open door and sung a song he hadn't planned to sing, and somehow all of that had led to this chair, this doctor, this question. Tell me what you need, Ethan said. Stevens exhaled slowly, and in that exhale was 6 weeks of desperate searching and closed doors and the particular exhaustion of a man who has been asking the same impossible question of the universe and getting no back. First, a full compatibility test. Tonight, if you're willing, it takes a few hours. I've got nowhere to be, Ethan said. Stevens stood. Ethan stood. They looked at each other in the fluorescent light, the doctor and the electrician, strangers 2 hours ago. Something else now. Mr. Carter, Stevens said, I don't know how to explain what happened in that room tonight. I probably never will. But I want you to know. He stopped, started again. Whatever comes next, what you did for Emma, just by being there, just by singing, that was already something. That was already more than most people would have done. Ethan picked up the bag of destroyed pretzels. He looked at them. He set them down on the chair. Let's go find out if I can do more, he said. And he followed Dr. Stevens down the corridor, past the nurse's station, past the doors that led to the ICU, where Emma Richardson was breathing on her own for the first time in 6 weeks, toward a room he didn't know yet, and a test that would change the direction of every life involved, his own, included in ways that none of them, not one single person in that hospital, on that ordinary Tuesday night in Portland, could have predicted or prepared for or imagined was coming. The compatibility lab was on the 5th floor, a place Ethan had never had a reason to visit before tonight, and hoped in some distant, rational part of his mind he would never need to visit again under circumstances like these. A technician named Joel Young and soft-spoken, with wire-rimmed glasses and careful hands, took 4 vials of blood in a cheek swab and told Ethan the full results would take 48 to 72 hours, though the preliminary markers could be read within a few hours. Joel didn't ask questions. He just worked. Ethan appreciated that more than he could say. When it was done, Ethan sat in the small waiting area outside the lab with his sleeve rolled down and a cotton ball taped into the crook of his elbow, and he finally called Mike. Dude, Mike answered on the second ring. Where are you? I've been here for 2 hours. They gave me a boot for my ankle and some ibuprofen and told me to follow up with my regular doctor. I'm literally sitting in the parking lot in the boot. Did you get lost? Yeah, Ethan said. Kind of. How do you kind of get lost in a hospital? It's a long story, Mike. There was a pause on the other end. Mike had known Ethan for 19 years since they were 13 and sitting next to each other in 7th grade science class. He could read a lot in the space between 2 sentences. You okay, he asked, and his voice had changed, the joking stripped out of it. I don't know yet, Ethan said honestly. Go home. I'll call you tomorrow. Ethan. I'm okay. Physically, I'm okay. I'll explain tomorrow. Go home and elevate your ankle. Another pause. You sure? Yeah, go. He hung up and sat there for a while, just holding his phone, watching the screen go dark. Dr. Stevens had told him to get something from the vending machine, to try to eat something, to wait. He had done none of those things. His mind kept circling back to the same 2 images over and over. Like a record skipping, Emma's fingers curling the smallest possible movement, reaching for something she couldn't see. And Stevens's face when he said the word match, the way it had shifted fractionally from the carefully maintained neutrality of a physician into something human and desperate and afraid. He was still sitting there when Patricia Huang found him. She was off her shift. He realized she had changed out of her scrubs into a jacket and regular clothes, and she was carrying her bag. She had been heading out, but she had come up to the 5th floor first. You're still here, she said. I said I'd wait. She sat down next to him, not because she had information to deliver, just because she sat down. And for a few minutes, neither of them said anything, and that was exactly the right thing. Then Patricia said, I've been a nurse for 17 years. I've worked cardiac, I've worked oncology, I've worked this HCU for the last 6. I have seen a lot of things I can't explain. She looked down at her hands. Tonight goes on a different list. What list is that? The one I keep for the things that make me think the universe isn't entirely indifferent, she said simply. Ethan looked at her. Do you believe that it's not indifferent? Tonight I do, she said. Ask me on a bad shift and I might give you a different answer. He almost laughed. It surprised him. He hadn't thought he had a laugh in him at that moment. Fair enough, he said. Patricia stood to go. She stopped. Emma's mother is here, she said. Helen Richardson. She drove from Salem the moment we called her. She's with Emma right now. She paused. Emma doesn't know about Lily yet. We're waiting until she's stronger. She's only been awake for a few hours. We have to be careful about what we tell her and when. Does she know about her husband? Ethan asked. Patricia's expression answered him before she did. Yes, she said quietly. We had to tell her. She asked for David the moment she could form words. You can't, she stopped. You can't lie about something like that, even when you want to. Ethan thought about the photograph on the bedside table. Two people laughing in the sun. He thought about the moment Emma had asked for someone who wasn't coming back and gotten an answer that would break her all over again, different from the break of the accident, quieter and deeper, and in some ways worse. How did she take it? He asked. Like someone who's been through enough that they recognize the weight of it before it even fully lands, Patricia said. She just went very quiet. Her mother held her hand, and she went very quiet, and she didn't cry. Not yet. The crying will come later, but right now she's just holding very still, understood. Ethan nodded slowly. He understood that. He had been quiet like that the night his grandfather died. Not numb, not broken, just very still. The way you get still when something is too large for motion. Patricia said goodnight. He watched her go. He was reaching for his jacket, finally accepting that there was nothing more he could do tonight, that the test results wouldn't be ready until morning, at the earliest when the elevator doors opened, and a woman stepped out who walked like someone trying very hard not to run. She was in her late 50s, with dark hair going silver, and Emma's same strong jaw, and she was still wearing a coat like she had come straight from wherever she'd been the moment her phone rang. She looked at the nurse's station, then down the corridor, then at Ethan, and her gaze passed over him the way a stranger's gaze does, dismissing him in half a second because she had somewhere to be. Then she stopped. She turned back to him. Are you the one, she asked, the man who was in Emma's room tonight? Ethan stood up slowly. Yes, ma'am. Ethan Carter. I'm sorry for the intrusion. I was in the wrong corridor. And I don't apologize, Helen Richardson said, and her voice cracked straight down the middle of the word apologize. She pressed one hand over her mouth. She took a breath. Two. Then she lowered her hand and looked at him with eyes that were wet but steady. Dr. Stevens told me. He told me what you did. Another breath. My daughter has been gone for 6 weeks. I have sat in that room and read to her and played her music and held her hand and talked to her every single day. And she stopped, started again. And you walked into the wrong room and sang a song. It was just a song, Ethan said, which was the same useless thing he'd been saying all night. It was just the right song, Helen said, in just the right room, at just the right moment. She was very close to breaking. Now he could see it the way you can see a bridge moving in wind. But she held. I don't know who you are, Mr. Carter. I don't know anything about you. But you gave me my daughter back tonight, and I don't know how to... She stopped again, pressed her lips together. I don't know how to hold that. You don't have to hold it right now, Ethan said. And then because he was his mother's son and his grandmother's grandson, and some things are instinct, go be with her. Helen Richardson looked at him for one more moment. Then she nodded, turned and walked down the corridor toward room 317. Ethan let out a long breath. He picked up his jacket. He had one foot pointed toward the elevator when the lab door opened behind him, and Joel, the technician, said quietly, Mr. Carter. He turned around. Joel was holding a tablet. His expression was the specific expression of someone who has information they are not sure they are supposed to share, but feel they cannot in good conscience not share. I know the full results aren't ready, Joel said carefully, and I know I should wait for Dr. Stevens to go over everything with you. He paused. But the preliminary markers. Another pause. He looked down at the tablet, then up at Ethan. I've been running this test for 4 years. I've processed hundreds of samples for Lily Richardson's case alone. We've never gotten a preliminary readout that looked like yours. Ethan's pulse jumped. What does that mean? It means, Joel said slowly, choosing each word like he was picking up something fragile, that you should probably be here in the morning when Dr. Stevens comes in at 7. Ethan stood very still. How close? He asked. Give me something real. Joel looked at the tablet one more time. He looked at Ethan. Something in his face made a decision. Close enough that I called Dr. Stevens at home 10 minutes ago, he said, and he's coming in tonight instead of waiting. The elevator behind Ethan opened and closed without anyone getting off. A phone rang at the nurse's station and someone answered it in a low voice. The fluorescent lights hummed their steady, indifferent hum. I'll stay, Ethan said. He found a chair in the family waiting area on the fourth floor near a window that looked out over the hospital parking lot. He bought a cup of coffee from a vending machine that was barely coffee thin and bitter, and too hot, the kind of coffee that exists purely to give your hand something to hold. He sat down with it and he waited. His phone had 14 text messages, all from his mother, because Mike had called her to make sure Ethan was okay, because that was exactly the kind of thing Mike would do. And it was also exactly the kind of thing that would have irritated Ethan under any other circumstances. But tonight just made him feel in a bone-deep way that he was lucky to have the people he had. He texted his mother, I'm fine. Helping someone? Will explain tomorrow. Love you. She responded in 30 seconds with 3 question marks and a prayer hands emoji. He put the phone face down on the seat beside him. He thought about the word match, the way Stevens had said it. Significant. He thought about what Joel had said, quiet and careful, like a man holding a lit match near something that could either burn down or shine. He thought about Lily Richardson, who had never seen her father and might never know her mother was alive, who had been fighting in a box of glass and warm air and machine-fed oxygen for 7 weeks without anyone having told her she could stop. He didn't know this baby. He didn't know this family. 4 hours ago, he didn't know any of these names. He closed his eyes and heard his grandmother's voice again, steady and low and warm. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. He was still sitting there, the cold coffee in his hands, when the waiting room door opened at 11:47 and Dr. Stevens walked in wearing a different shirt than he'd had on earlier, meaning he had gone home and come back, meaning Joel had called him and he had come back. Stevens looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Stevens. Stevens sat down across from him, not next to him this time, across the way a doctor sits when he is about to deliver results. The preliminary panel, Stevens said, is more conclusive than I expected. Ethan put down the coffee. Tell me. I want to be very precise with you, because this matters, and I don't want to overstate it or understate it. Stevens leaned forward. A bone marrow match is measured across multiple genetic markers. The more markers that align, the higher the chance of a successful transplant without rejection. For an unrelated donor, someone with no family connection to the recipient, a 10 out of 10 marker match is extraordinarily rare. It happens, but it is rare. Most successful unrelated transplants work with 8 or 9 out of 10. He paused. Ethan, your preliminary panel is showing a potential 10 out of 10 match. The waiting room was very quiet. That's not possible, Ethan said. Not argumentatively, just honestly, because it wasn't. It defied everything reasonable about probability and chance and the fundamental way the world worked. It shouldn't be, Stevens agreed, and I want to emphasize that the preliminary panel is not definitive. We need the full results to confirm, and there is still a margin for error. But in 26 years, I have never seen a preliminary this strong from an unrelated donor. He looked at Ethan steadily. There's something else. Ethan went still. Stevens set the tablet down on the table between them and turned it so Ethan could see. When we enter a potential donor into the system, the algorithm cross-references against the full patient history, standard protocol. He pointed to a section of the readout. Ethan, where were you born? The question was so unexpected that Ethan blinked. What? Where were you born? Mercy General, here in Portland. Why? Stevens looked at the screen, then at Ethan. And your parents, biological parents, are they both from Portland originally? Something cold moved through Ethan's chest. My mother is. My father? He stopped. His father was Robert Carter, who had grown up in Bend, Oregon, who had died of a heart attack when Ethan was 22. Straightforward, simple, except. My dad was adopted, Ethan said slowly. He never knew his biological family. He never really tried to find them. He said it didn't matter to him. He looked at Stevens. Why are you asking me this? Stevens took a breath. Because the HLA markers, the specific genetic identifiers that create a bone marrow match, are inherited. They come from your biological lineage. The reason an unrelated match this strong is so rare is because these markers cluster in genetic family lines. He paused. Ethan Lily Richardson's father, David Richardson, we have his full genetic profile on file from the prenatal screening. And there are 3 markers in your profile that are, the alignment is, say it straight, Ethan said. His voice was very quiet. Stephen said it straight. There is a possibility, not a certainty, but a real possibility, that you and David Richardson share a biological ancestor, that you are in some sense family. The word landed like something dropped from a height. Family. Ethan stared at the tablet, at the numbers and letters that meant nothing to him individually and apparently meant everything in combination. He thought about his father, Robert Carter, quiet and steady, who had grown up in the foster system in Bend and never once talked about what that meant, who had built a life so determinedly normal and present that the past had seemed not to exist for him, who had died at 58 without ever knowing his own medical history, without ever knowing where those particular eyes came from, that particular jaw, that particular way of going very still when something was serious. This is you're saying David Richardson might have been my father's. I'm saying we don't know yet, Stephen said. The DNA would have to be analyzed specifically for that question, and it would take time, and it is absolutely secondary to the question of whether you can save Lily's life. But the markers don't lie, Ethan. Something connected you to this family before you ever walked into that room tonight. He stopped. Maybe it connected you to that room. Ethan pushed back from the table. He stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot, at the ordinary cars and ordinary lines, under ordinary light, at a world that was behaving exactly as the world should behave, while everything inside him spun. I need a minute, he said. Take all the time you need, Stephen said behind him. He stood there and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way his mother had taught him. In, out, the parking lot, the lights, the ordinary world. His father had been adopted. His father had never known his own blood. His father had built a life out of the people he chose and the work he did and the love he gave, and it had been enough. It had been more than enough, but somewhere in the genetic architecture of Robert Carter's unknown history, something had been waiting. A thread, a connection running forward through time and chance, in a wrong corridor, in an open door, in a song about sunshine. He turned back around. Stevens was watching him with the patience of a man who had learned to wait. If the full results confirm it, Ethan said, if I'm a match, what does the donation process look like? Stevens straightened slightly. For a bone marrow transplant, there are 2 methods. The first is a peripheral blood stem cell collection. They use medication to stimulate stem cell production, then filter them from your blood. Outpatient procedure generally. The second is a direct marrow harvest, a surgical procedure under general anesthesia. Given Lily's condition, her team may prefer the second. There are risks as with any surgery. Recovery takes a week or 2. It is not trivial. He paused. And it is entirely your choice. No one can compel you to do this. Ethan nodded slowly. When would we know for certain the full results? Tomorrow afternoon at the latest. And how long does Lily have? Stevens was quiet for a moment. 6 weeks, maybe 8 if we're fortunate and her counts hold. But her last blood work showed a decline. We're not in a position to be optimistic about the outer edge of that window. 6 weeks. A baby fighting for 6 weeks in a glass box down a hallway with a mother who didn't know she existed yet and a father who was never coming back and a stranger in a waiting room who might be the only bridge between her and a life she hadn't been able to start. Ethan picked up the cold coffee. He looked at it. He set it back down. Okay, he said. Stevens looked at him carefully. Okay meaning when the full results come back tomorrow, I'm in. If I'm a match, I'm in, all the way. He met Stevens's eyes. Start the paperwork. Something shifted in Stevens's face, not relief exactly because a physician this experienced did not let himself feel relief before the results were confirmed, but something adjacent to it, something that was hope wearing the face of professionalism. I'll need you here at 7 tomorrow morning, Stevens said. I'd like you to meet with our transplant coordinator and our legal team. And I want to run one more panel before we finalize anything. He paused. And Ethan Emma doesn't know yet about Lily's condition, about the search for a donor, about any of it. We've been waiting until she was stable enough. We'll need to tell her soon. She is Lily's mother and she has rights in this process. He looked at him. She'll want to meet you. Ethan thought about Emma Richardson's eyes opening in that quiet room, the slow returning focus, the words she had shaped with her lips before she had the voice to say it out loud. Where am I? She didn't know yet that the answer was in the middle of a story that had started before you woke up, that had been running parallel to your silence, that involved a stranger and a song, and a baby who needed something only a stranger could give. I'll be here at 7, Ethan said. He gathered his jacket, his dead phone, his everything. He walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors opened. He stepped in. As the doors closed, he caught one last glimpse of Dr. Stephen, and still sitting in the waiting room, looking at the tablet with the expression of a man who had gone, looking for a miracle for 7 weeks and had watched one walk through the wrong door. The elevator descended. Ethan Carter rode it down through the floors of St. Mary's Hospital, past the ICU where Emma Richardson was sleeping for the first time in weeks, with her mother's hand in hers, past the floor, where a lab technician named Joel was running results that would confirm what the preliminary markers already strongly suggested, past all the ordinary human machinery of illness and survival and chance. Somewhere above him, on the second floor in a room he had not yet visited, a 7-week-old girl named Lily was breathing in and out in the particular determined way of someone who has decided despite everything not to stop. Ethan was back at St. Mary's at 6:43 in the morning, 17 minutes early because he had not slept. He had driven home at midnight, sat on the edge of his bed, still in his jacket, and stared at the wall until 3 a.m., at which point he had given up the pretense of sleeping, made a pot of actual coffee, and sat at his kitchen table until it was a reasonable hour to leave. He had not eaten. He had not called anyone. He had just sat there with the coffee and the quiet and the weight of everything Stevens had told him, turning it over and over in his mind, the way you turn a stone in your hand, feeling its edges. His father had been adopted. 3 markers. A genetic thread running through the dark, connecting a dead man to a dead man, connecting their children across a distance neither family had known existed. He pushed through the hospital's front entrance and went straight to the 5th floor. Joel was already there. The young technician looked like he hadn't slept either, and when he saw Ethan step off the elevator, something in his posture changed, a kind of relieved straightening, like a person who had been holding their breath. Dr. Stevens is already in, Joel said. He wants to see you in the conference room on this floor. I'll take you. Ethan followed him. He noticed Joel wasn't making small talk. Joel was the kind of person who made small talk reflexively, who had asked about the weather and Ethan's drive over during the blood draw the night before. The silence now was not the silence of someone with nothing to say. It was the silence of someone with something very specific to say who was waiting for the right person to say it to. The conference room was small, a table, 6 chairs, a whiteboard with old marker lines that hadn't been fully erased. Stevens was there along with a woman Ethan hadn't met, mid-40s, precise and attentive, who introduced herself as Dr. Karen Yee, the head of the pediatric transplant unit. There was also a man in a gray suit whose name was Marcus Webb from the hospital's legal and patient advocacy office. Ethan sat down. He looked at the 3 of them. He said, "Just tell me." Stevens opened the folder in front of him. He didn't draw it out. He had the results, and he read them the way a man reads something he has already memorized, which meant he had been sitting with this information for some time before Ethan arrived. "Full panel confirms it," Stevens said. 10 out of 10 HLA markers. You are a perfect match for Lily Richardson." The room was very quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then Ethan said, "Okay," and Karen Yee pressed both her hands flat on the table like she needed to feel something solid, and Marcus Webb clicked his pen and Stevens closed the folder. "I want to explain what that means practically," Karen Yee said, leaning forward. She was the kind of person who communicated through precision, who found clarity kinder than vagueness, and Ethan liked that immediately. A 10 out of 10 match from an unrelated donor is statistically extraordinary. The National Registry has over 20 million registered donors. For Lily's specific profile, we have been searching for 7 weeks and found nothing above a 6. You are a 10. She looked at him steadily. This is the difference between a transplant with a very high risk of rejection and a transplant with a genuinely strong prognosis for success. If you proceed and Lily's body responds as the marker suggested, we are talking about a real chance at a normal life. "And if I don't proceed," Ethan said. Karen Yee didn't flinch. "Without a transplant, Lily Richardson will not survive beyond 8 weeks. Her red blood cell counts are declining. We have been managing with transfusions, but transfusions are not a long-term solution for diamond black fan anemia. They are a bridge, and the bridge has an end. Marcus Webb cleared his throat gently. Mr. Carter, I want to make sure you understand the full scope of what we're asking. The donation procedure itself. I already told Dr. Stevens last night, Ethan said. I'm in. I don't need to be convinced. Tell me what the procedure looks like and when we can do it. The three of them exchanged a look. Not a look of surprise exactly, more like the look of people who had prepared for a long conversation and just had it compressed into 30 seconds. Karen Yee pulled out a second folder. They talked for an hour. The procedure would be a peripheral blood stem cell collection medication, first injections over 4 days to stimulate stem cell production, then an outpatient apheresis procedure to collect the cells from his blood. No general anesthesia required, which was better for everyone. Side effects from the stimulating medication could include bone pain, fatigue, headache. The collection itself took 4 to 6 hours. He would need to take a week off work. He would need to sign consent forms, complete a physical, and come back the following morning to begin the medication protocol. Ethan listened to all of it. He asked 2 questions, one about the bone pain and one about when Lily could receive the cells, and then he signed the consent forms, while Stevens watched and Marcus Webb witnessed, and Karen Yee was already on her phone arranging the physical. When it was done, Marcus Webb gathered the papers and left. Karen Yee followed, pausing at the door to say, Mr. Carter, I've been in pediatric transplant medicine for 18 years. I want you to know that what you're doing today, not just signing these forms, but being here at all, it's the right thing. Not many people would. She left before he could respond to that, which he was grateful for, because he didn't know what he would have said. Stevens stayed. There's something you need to know, Stevens said, before you go any further in this building today. Ethan looked at him. Emma knows about Lily. Ethan went still. You told her. Her mother did, last night after we spoke. Helen felt she couldn't hold it from her daughter, and I agreed with that decision ultimately. Emma has a right to know her child is alive and in this hospital. We couldn't keep that from her. Stevens looked at his hands. She didn't take it the way we expected. What do you mean? I mean she didn't cry. She didn't ask to be taken down to the NICU immediately, which is what most mothers do. She went very quiet again, the same way she had when we told her about David. And then she asked one question. He paused. She asked whether her daughter was going to make it. We told her the truth, that we were actively searching for a donor match. And she looked at her mother and she said, find him. Find whoever it is. Tell them I need to talk to them. Ethan felt something move through him that he didn't have a name for. She said him, Stevens confirmed. I don't know if she knows it's you specifically, but she knows there's a potential donor because I had Patricia brief her this morning, and she's asking to meet you. He paused. You don't have to, Ethan. You've already signed the forms. This is already happening. Meeting her is entirely your choice. Ethan thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. Room 317. Room 317, Stevens said. He knocked before he went in, which felt important because it was her room and her life, and he was still, on some fundamental level, a man who had walked through a door he had no business walking through. The knock was quiet. He waited. Helen Richardson opened the door. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Her eyes were tired in the way of someone who had been awake through a long night of feeling too many things, but when she saw Ethan, something in her face went soft. She's awake, Helen said. She's been awake since 5. She wants to see you. She stepped back to let him in, and then very quietly she said, thank you, the way people say it when they mean something that thank you is not big enough for. He stepped inside. Emma Richardson was sitting up in the bed. That was the first thing that registered. She was sitting up, which was different from the woman who had lain motionless the night before. She was still connected to monitors and an IV line, still pale in the particular way of someone who had been very sick for a very long time, still fragile in ways both visible and not. But she was upright. She was present. She was looking at him. She was younger than he'd realized in the dim light the night before. 29, he would learn later. Dark hair, dark eyes, the kind of face that looked like it was built for expression, like it was made to hold joy and grief in equal measure, and be honest about both. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking. He stood just inside the doorway and let her look because he understood instinctively that she needed to see who he was before she decided what to say to him. "You're Ethan," she said. Her voice was still rough from the ventilator tube still working its way back from 6 weeks of silence. "You were in my room last night." "I was," he said. "I'm sorry for—" "Don't apologize," she said, exactly what her mother had said. "Please don't apologize." She looked at him another moment. "My mother told me you sang. She said you sang 'You Are My Sunshine.'" "Yes. My husband used to sing that to my stomach," Emma said. "When I was pregnant, he said he read online that babies can hear music in the womb. He thought it was silly, but he did it anyway every night before bed." She stopped. She looked down at her hands. He had a terrible voice. Something in Ethan's chest pulled tight. "So do I," he said. Emma looked up. And despite everything, despite the grief and the weeks of darkness and the weight of all she had woken up to find waiting for her, she almost smiled. Almost. The corners of her mouth moved. "My mom said it was actually pretty good." "Your mom is being generous." Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Barney, they told me it's about Lily." The almost smile was gone. Her voice had changed the way a key changes when you turn it in a lock, the same motion, but something opening now instead of almost opening. "They told me she's been down there since the night of the accident. 7 weeks. And She stopped, pressed her lips together, pressed hard enough that they went white. "She's sick. They told me about the anemia. They told me they have been looking for a match for all this time, and they couldn't find one." She looked directly at him. "And then they told me about you." "What did they tell you?" Ethan asked. "That you might be a match, that you came in last night for completely unrelated reasons, that you wandered into the wrong room, that you sang a song, and that somehow—" She stopped again. This time she didn't press her lips together. This time she let the emotion move across her face openly, honestly, the way it wanted to. "Somehow you turned out to be the person my daughter needs." Her voice dropped to just above a whisper. "Is it true? Are you a match?" "Yes," Ethan said. "Bull match. I got the results this morning. I signed the consent forms an hour ago." Emma Richardson put both hands over her face. She didn't make a sound. She sat very still with her hands over her face and her shoulders shook once. And then she lowered her hands and looked at the ceiling and took a long breath, and the tears were running down her face, and she didn't wipe them. "Why?" she said. She looked at him. "Why would you do this? You don't know us. You don't know me, or Lily, or—" "I know enough," Ethan said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have," he said honestly. "I walked in the wrong door. I sang a song. And then a doctor told me there was a baby who needed something I might be able to give. That's all it was. I didn't think about it very long." Emma stared at him. "Most people would have thought about it very long." "Maybe, but it's not who I am." He paused. Then, because honesty seemed to be the only currency that worked in this room, he added, "There might be something else. The doctors found there might be a genetic connection between me and your husband. Something in the markers that suggests we might share family somewhere in the past." He watched her face. "My father was adopted. He never knew his biological family. And there are markers in my DNA that line up with David's in a way that shouldn't happen between total strangers." Emma went very still. "They don't know for certain," he said quickly. "They'd need more DNA analysis to establish anything specific. And it doesn't change anything about the donation that's already happening regardless. But Stevens thought you should know." Emma said nothing for a very long time. She was somewhere inside herself processing something that was clearly too large and too strange and too much layered on top of too much. Then she said very quietly, "David was adopted too." Ethan felt the air go out of him. "He never talked about it much," Emma continued. Her voice was low and careful, like she was handling something breakable. "He knew he was adopted as an infant. He tried once to find his biological family. He was about 25, but the records were sealed and he couldn't get anywhere. He let it go after that. He said the family he had was enough." She paused. "He said that all the time. What you have is enough. It was how he moved through the world." Her breath caught. "It was one of the things I loved about him." Ethan stood very still. "So you might be," Emma started. "I don't know what we are," Ethan said. "The doctors don't know yet either, but something brought me to this floor and to that room and to your daughter. Whatever that something is. He stopped. He thought about his father's unknown history. He thought about David Richardson singing to his wife's stomach in the dark, not knowing why the song felt right, not knowing where the instinct for it came from. Whatever that something is, he said. It was already there before either of us knew about it. Helen Richardson, who had been standing near the window in silence, made a small sound. She covered her mouth. She turned toward the window. Emma looked at Ethan with an expression he had no category for. It was grief and wonder and exhaustion, and something that hadn't had room to exist yet. In the 6 weeks she'd been unconscious, something that was only possible now that she was awake and present and alive enough to feel the full impossible weight of everything converging in this room. Can I meet her? Emma said. Lily, when can I? I already asked Patricia, Helen said from the window, her voice slightly unsteady. She's arranging a wheelchair. They'll take you down this afternoon if you feel strong enough. Emma turned to look at her mother. Something passed between them, the specific wordless conversation of two people who have loved each other through hard things and know how to speak in the language of expression and silence. Then Emma looked back at Ethan. Will you come? She asked. When I go to see her, will you come with me? He hadn't expected the question. He could see from her face that she hadn't entirely expected it either. It had come out of her honest and unplanned the way real things do when a person is too tired to manage their feelings into shape. You don't have to ask me, he said. I know I don't have to, she said. I'm asking. He looked at her, at this woman who had woken up into a world that had rearranged itself catastrophically while she was absent from it, who had lost her husband and found her daughter and learned in the same 12-hour span that a stranger who was possibly not entirely a stranger held her daughter's life in his bone marrow, who was asking him to stand beside her for something that was hers alone because she had decided she wanted him there. Yes, he said, I'll come. It was 2:17 in the afternoon when Patricia Huang wheeled Emma Richardson off the elevator on the second floor and down the corridor toward the NICU. Ethan walked on her left side, Helen on her right. None of them spoke. There was nothing to say that the moment wasn't already saying on its own. The NICU nurse, a broad-shouldered woman named Greta, who had the quiet confidence of someone who had worked with the smallest and most fragile humans for many years, met them at the door. She looked at Emma with the specific warmth of someone who had been tending someone's baby in their absence and felt the weight of that responsibility every single day. She knows you're coming, Greta said, which was not literally true, but was true in the way that mattered, in the way of someone saying, we have been telling her, we have been saying your name to her every day. We have been making sure the sound of you was not entirely absent from her world. Emma gripped the arms of the wheelchair. Her knuckles went white. I'm scared, she said. She wasn't saying it to anyone in particular. She was just saying it because it was true. That's okay, Greta said simply. She's not scared. She's been waiting. They went in. What happened in that room in the next 4 minutes was private, in the way that only the most essential human moments are private, not because anyone was excluded, but because the thing itself existed in a dimension that observation couldn't fully enter. Emma reached into the incubator with both hands, and Greta guided her and Lily, 7 weeks old, small beyond description, fierce beyond all reasonable expectation, wrapped one hand around Emma's index finger with a grip that was improbably, absurdly, magnificently strong. Emma made a sound that was not a word. It was something older than words. Ethan stood back by the door with Helen. He was not crying, and then he was, and he didn't bother to address the transition. Helen's hand found his arm, not saying anything, just there, just present. And Lily held on. She held on with that one hand, that grip that should not have been possible in something so small. And Emma bent over the incubator and said something too quiet for anyone else to hear, and said it again. And the monitors above Lily's head showed her heartbeat, steady and determined, beat by beat the rhythm of a person who has decided not to stop. She's strong, Greta said softly to no one in particular. She's her father's daughter, Helen said, and her voice broke cleanly in half on the last word, and she didn't try to put it back together. Ethan stood there in the doorway of that room with the steady beeping of monitors and the smell of antiseptic and the weight of everything that had led to this exact moment, and he thought about a wrong turn and an open door and a song about sunshine, and he understood, maybe for the first time in his 32 years, that the distance between a stranger and a family is sometimes just one hallway, one door, One decision made without thinking because it was simply the right thing to do. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. He was not going anywhere. Tomorrow he would begin the medication protocol. 4 days of injections, then the collection procedure, then the transplant. It would hurt. It would take time. And there was still fear in it, the fear that even a perfect match might not be enough. That Lily's body might have other things to say about the matter, that the markers that lined up so precisely on paper might encounter complications in the reality of a 7-week-old's immune system. But that was tomorrow's fear. Today's reality was this room and Emma's bent shoulders and Lily's hand wrapped around her mother's finger and Greta standing quietly nearby and Helen with her broken voice and Ethan Carter, electrician from Southeast Portland, wrong corridor, wrong door, wrong room man, standing witness to the thing his wrong turn had made possible. His grandmother's voice moved through him one more time, warm and unhurried. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. He hadn't known when he sang it who it was for. He had thought it was just reflex, just habit, just the thing his hands reached for when the moment was too large for anything else. But maybe she had known. Maybe Mabel Carter, with her warm hands and her steady voice and her 61 years of accumulated wisdom about what people needed when they were lost, had planted that song in him for exactly this moment. For a room he hadn't known existed. For a woman he hadn't known was listening. For a baby fighting in the dark who needed the sound of something warm to hold on to. You make me happy when skies are gray. Emma looked up from the incubator. She looked at Ethan across the room and her face was wet and open and completely unguarded in the way faces only get when everything else has been stripped away. She's beautiful, Emma said. She is, Ethan said. She looks like her father. Emma's voice broke on the last word. She held it anyway. Around the eyes, she has his eyes. Ethan said nothing. He just stayed where he was, present, steady, there, which was in the end all any of it had ever required of him. The first injection was on a Thursday morning, administered by a nurse named Renata, who had forearms like a longshoreman and a voice like a kindergarten teacher, a combination that Ethan found oddly comforting. She walked him through exactly what the filgrastim would do: stimulate his bone marrow, to overproduce stem cells, push them into his bloodstream, make him feel, in her words, like he had run a marathon while catching a flu. She said it plainly without apology, which he appreciated. Some people get through it fine, she said. Some people feel like they got hit by a truck. We won't know which you are until day 2. Great, Ethan said. The important thing is you tell us if anything feels wrong, not just uncomfortable. Wrong. There's a difference and your body will know it. How will I know? Renata looked at him with the expression of someone who has explained this many times. You'll know, she said. He was wrong about the truck. It was more like a very large, very determined person had taken up residence inside a skeleton and was pushing outward from the inside steadily and without mercy. By Friday evening, his lower back ached in a way he had no previous reference for, deep and constant. The kind of pain that doesn't spike but simply exists present in every position, waiting for him whenever he shifted or breathed too deeply or made the mistake of trying to sleep. He did not complain about this to anyone. He texted Renata to confirm it was within expected parameters. It was, and then he put his phone down and watched a baseball game he couldn't focus on until midnight. Mike came over Saturday morning. He arrived with a paper bag from the diner on Morrison Street containing 2 breakfast sandwiches and coffee that was actual coffee, not vending machine approximation, and he sat down at Ethan's kitchen table and put both hands flat on the surface and said, "Okay, I need you to explain what is happening from the beginning." So Ethan told him, all of it. The wrong corridor, room 317. Emma the song Stevens, the matching the donation, the possible genetic connection. He told it straight through without editorializing, the way he always told things, letting the facts do the work. Mike sat across from him and listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Mike, who had an instinct for filling silence. The breakfast sandwiches went cold. When Ethan finished, Mike was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The song, your grandma's song. Yeah, you just sang it in a stranger's room. I know how it sounds." "It sounds insane," Mike said. "It also sounds exactly like something you would do." He picked up his coffee, put it down without drinking it. "Ethan, this woman's husband might be your cousin, or something." Or something, Ethan agreed. And you found this out by walking through the wrong door. Correct. Mike looked at him for a long time. Your dad never talked about it. His adoption. Any of it. Not really. He said the family he had was enough. Ethan paused. Turns out David Richardson said the same thing about his own adoption. Mike shook his head slowly, not in disbelief in the specific way of someone recalibrating, making room in their understanding of the world for something that didn't fit the previous model. When do you find out for sure about the family connection? Stephen said the DNA analysis is running separately from the donation workup. Could be another week. Could be 2. Ethan shrugs. It doesn't change what I'm doing either way. No, Mike said, it doesn't. He finally picked up the coffee and drank it. How do you feel physically? Like someone put rocks inside my spine. Okay, I'm staying today. Mike, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. Mike unwrapped one of the cold sandwiches and pushed the other across the table. Eat. You need to eat. Ethan ate. He went back to St. Mary's that afternoon not because he had a medical reason to, but because Emma had texted him her first text sent from her mother's phone since Emma's had been destroyed in the accident, a single line Lily had a good morning. Thought you'd want to know. He had read it standing in his kitchen and felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized was tight. Emma was out of the ICU by Saturday. They had moved her to a regular room on the 4th floor, which Stevens had described as a milestone and Helen had described with trembling relief as a miracle, and Patricia had described accurately as the logical result of a woman with exceptional baseline health and a very strong will. Emma herself had described it as about time, which told Ethan more about her personality than anything anyone else had said. When he got to her room, she was sitting up in the chair beside the bed, rather than in the bed itself, wearing a hospital gown over a sweater her mother had brought from home, her dark hair pulled back, both hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked exhausted in the specific way of someone who is recovering from 2 catastrophes simultaneously and refusing to let either one of them win. Helen was in the corner with a crossword puzzle, her reading glasses on the end of her nose, performing the specific maternal performance of being present while giving them space. You came, Emma said. You said Lily had a good morning. She did. Emma looked at him. Her oxygen saturation was better. Greta said she's been more alert. She tracked movement today. Her eyes followed Greta's hand. She paused. They said that's a good sign. That responsiveness. That's a great sign, Ethan said. Sit down, Emma said, nodding toward the chair across from hers. You look terrible. The medication, he said, sitting. It's normal. Renata warned me it would be rough. Emma's expression shifted. I asked her about what you're going through for this. She told me more than I expected her to. She's forthcoming like that. She said the bone pain can be severe. Emma looked at him directly. Is it severe? It's manageable. Emma's jaw set slightly. That's not what I asked. He looked back at her. There was something about the way she asked questions straight and without preamble, requiring an honest answer, and clearly able to identify when she wasn't getting one that he recognized from somewhere he couldn't name. Some quality in the directness of it. Yes, he said. It's significant. She held his gaze. Thank you for telling me the truth. She looked down at her tea. I keep trying to figure out how to hold what you're doing. I can't find the frame for it. You're in pain right now because of my daughter and you signed up for it voluntarily and I can't. She stopped. I keep wanting to apologize for it. I know that's ridiculous. You chose it, but I keep feeling like I owe you something I don't have the vocabulary for. You don't owe me anything, Ethan said. Don't tell me that. Her voice sharpened, not in anger, but in the way of someone pushing back on something that doesn't sit right. Don't diminish it. What you're doing for Lily is real and it costs something real, and I am allowed to acknowledge that. He was quiet for a moment. Fair enough, he said, and thank you. She took a sip of her tea. Somewhere in the room, Helen's pencil moved across the crossword puzzle, present and quiet, and pretending very convincingly not to listen to every word. Ethan, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Did you know right away last night when Stevens told you about Lily and asked you to stay? Did you know right away that you were going to say yes? He thought about it honestly. He thought about the plastic chair and the cold coffee and the quiet of the waiting room. Pretty much, he said. I sat with it for a few minutes, but yeah, pretty much right away. Why, I don't know how to explain it better than this, he said slowly. I've never had a moment in my life where the right thing was unclear to me. I don't mean I always do the right thing. I mean the right thing is usually obvious. Most of the time people know what they should do, they just decide not to for various reasons. This one wasn't hard to see. Emma looked at him for a long moment. David was like that, she said, quietly, like she was handling the name carefully. He always knew. He never had the thing where the right thing was vague to him. I used to tease him about it. I'd say some moral question is complicated, and he'd look at me like I had two heads. She almost smiled. Almost. I miss that. I miss someone knowing. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then Ethan's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. It was a number he didn't recognize, local Portland area code. He almost didn't answer, but something made him. "Excuse me," he said to Emma and stepped toward the door. "Ethan Carter." The voice on this other end was a woman, older, carefully composed in the way of someone delivering news they have been sitting with for a while. "This is Dr. Sandra Park. I'm with the genetic analysis team working with Dr. Stevens' office on your case." Ethan's pulse jumped. "I thought the results were another week out." "They were," Dr. Park said. "However, the specific markers we were analyzing are computationally simpler than a full ancestry profile, so we were able to prioritize the comparison between your DNA and David Richardson's genetic sample, which we had on file." A pause. "I want to walk you through what we found because it requires some context." "Tell me," Ethan said. "The comparison confirms a shared biological ancestor," Dr. Park said. "At the level of genetic overlap we're looking at a half-sibling relationship, or more likely, given the generational gap, a first-cousin relationship. Specifically, we believe your father, Robert Carter, and David Richardson's biological father were brothers, possibly twins given the marker density." Ethan's back hit the wall next to the door. He hadn't meant to move, but his body had made the decision independently. "Brothers," he said, "almost certainly. Two men both placed for adoption in Portland in the early 1960s, separated likely as infants. The records from that era are fragmentary, but the genetic evidence is Mr. Carter. It's unambiguous. You and David Richardson were first cousins, which makes you and Lily Richardson family, biological family." Ethan stood against the wall and said nothing. "I know this is a significant amount of information," Dr. Park said carefully. "Do you need a moment?" "I need more than a moment," he said honestly. "But yes, thank you." He ended the call. He stood with his back against the wall for what felt like a long time, but was probably less than 30 seconds. He looked at the door. On the other side of it, Emma Richardson was drinking tea and holding her grief in both hands and asking him honest questions and talking about her husband who was gone. Her husband who had been Ethan's first cousin. His father, Robert Carter, and David Richardson's biological father brothers. Separated in the 1960s, placed with different families, living out their lives in parallel lines that never crossed, building separate worlds out of the same genetic material, singing the same songs to their children without knowing why. His grandmother's voice came to him again. "You are my sunshine." Mabel Carter had sung it to Robert Carter the same way she later sang it to Ethan, had taught it to a boy who had no blood history, who had arrived in her family as an infant with nothing but himself, and she had given him that song the way she gave everything completely and without condition. And that boy had grown up and never found his brother, but his son had walked through a door in the wrong corridor and found the brother's grandson's widow and sung the song and brought her back. Ethan pushed off from the wall. He opened the door. He walked back into the room. Emma looked up at him. She read his face immediately. Whatever was on it was not subtle. "What happened?" she said. "What was that call?" He sat down. He looked at her and he looked at Helen, who had put down the crossword puzzle and was watching him over the rims of her reading glasses. "The genetic results came in early," he said. "Dr. Park from the genetics team." He paused. "Emma, David was my cousin. Our fathers were brothers, both adopted as infants in Portland in the early 60s. They never found each other. But the genetics, she said, it's unambiguous." The silence that followed was the longest silence Ethan had ever sat inside. It lasted long enough that he could hear the hospital's ventilation system, the distant beeping of monitors somewhere down the hall, Helen's sharp inhale through her nose. Emma did not move. She sat perfectly still with both hands around the cup of tea and looked at him with an expression that was not surprise or not only surprise. It was the expression of something clicking into place, of a shape that had been confusing suddenly revealing its pattern. He looked for them, she said finally. Her voice was very low. His biological family? When he was 25. He tried for almost 2 years. The records were sealed. She stopped. He told me once we were lying in bed and it was late and he was in that tired, honest mood people get. He told me he felt like there was a version of his life he was supposed to have found and hadn't, like a room he'd walked past without opening the door. She looked at Ethan. He said maybe some connections just skip a generation. Ethan's throat was tight. He didn't trust himself to speak. He had a cousin, Emma said. He had a cousin in Portland the whole time and he never knew. She pressed one hand over her mouth. He would have, she stopped, pressed harder. Then, he would have loved you. He would have called you every Sunday and dragged you to every terrible basketball game and showed up at your door with beer you didn't ask for. Her voice cracked. He was that kind of person. Sounds like someone I know, Helen said softly from the corner. She was not looking at the crossword anymore. I'm sorry, Ethan said, because he was. He was sorry for all the years that had been missed for two brothers in the 1960s who didn't know each other existed for David Richardson, who had searched and not found for a connection that had arrived 40 years too late to be what it should have been. I'm sorry he didn't get to know. Don't be sorry, Emma said, and she sounded like her mother and herself simultaneously, that same refusal of pity, that same insistence on holding things as they are rather than as they hurt. He didn't get to know you, but Lily will. She looked at him steadily. You're her family, Ethan. You're her father's blood, and you're going to save her life. Her voice held absolutely. He would have wanted that. He would have said that's enough. That's more than enough. Ethan thought of Robert Carter again. Steady, quiet, content, the man who had built a life out of the people he chose and called it sufficient. He thought of David Richardson, who had said the same thing about his own chosen family, who had apparently moved through the world with the same particular peace about what he had and what he hadn't found. Two men shaped by the same invisible architecture, living out the same philosophy, dying without knowing it was shared. The bone pain in his lower back throbbed steadily. He breathed through it. When's the collection procedure? Emma asked. Monday morning, 7 a.m. I'll be awake, she said. I'll be awake when you go in. She looked at him like this was not a statement, but a promise, and he understood it as one. I'll be thinking about you. You should sleep, he said. I'll be awake, she repeated. Not unkindly, just finally. Monday came the way hard days come, without ceremony, gray and ordinary from the outside while being anything but on the inside. Ethan arrived at the apheresis unit at 6:52, signed in, changed into a hospital gown, and sat in the reclining chair while Renata started his IV lines, one in each arm, because the machine needed to draw blood from one side and return it processed on the other. She worked efficiently and without fuss, which was exactly what he needed. You doing okay? She asked. Asked me in 6 hours, he said. She almost smiled. Fair. The machine started. It was loud in a low rhythmic way, and the process was strange. He could feel his blood leaving his body on the left side and returning on the right, slightly cooler, and the sensation was not painful but deeply uncanny, the feeling of something fundamental happening just below the threshold of what the body was designed to be aware of. He had his phone. He didn't use it much. He watched the ceiling. He thought about his father. He thought about David Richardson singing in the dark to Emma's stomach, not knowing the song had come to him down a chain of women and men he'd never met. He thought about Lily 3 floors up, holding on with that improbable grip. At 9:17, his phone buzzed. Emma. The text said Lily's numbers are up this morning. Greta says she's feisty today. Her word, feisty. He smiled at his phone in the apheresis chair, both arms connected to tubes, the machine doing its slow and necessary work. He typed back with some difficulty. Sounds like her mother. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then, you have no idea. He set the phone down, still smiling, and the machine continued its work, drawing and returning, drawing and returning. collecting the thing that Lily Richardson needed from the body of the cousin she had never met, building the bridge that would carry her from where she was to where she needed to go. At 12:41, Renata unhooked the lines and pressed a cotton ball into the crook of each arm and said, "Done." She looked at the collection bag with an expression that Ethan had learned to read on medical professionals over the past week, the specific suppressed emotion of someone who is professional enough not to show everything they feel and human enough not to hide it entirely. The transplant team will process this today and administer it to Lily within the next 4 to 6 hours. Ethan sat up slowly. His arms ached. His back still ached. His head was light in the particular way of someone who has given something physical and felt the giving. "That's it," he said. "That's it," Renata confirmed. "From your end, that's it." She looked at him. "How do you feel?" "Like I need to sleep for a year." "That's normal." She helped him to his feet. "Eat something real. Rest today and tomorrow. Take the ibuprofen I'm going to send home with you. Come back Thursday for a follow-up blood draw." She paused. "Ethan?" He looked at her. "I've been in this unit for 11 years, she said. "I process donors all the time. Most of them are strangers to the recipient. They sign up on the registry years before they get called. They come in, they donate, they go home. They never meet the person they saved. Most of them are fine with that. Some of them, you can tell, wish they knew." She looked at him steadily. "You know her. You're going to watch this work. That's not something most people get." Her voice was completely level and completely sincere. "Don't take it for granted." "I won't," he said. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for a few minutes before driving. Not because he needed to, just because he wanted a moment between the inside and the outside, between the thing that had just happened and the ordinary world waiting on the other side of the windshield. He put both hands on the steering wheel and looked at the concrete barrier in front of him and breathed. His phone rang. Unknown number, but a different unknown number from Dr. Park's call, and something in him tightened. He answered. "Mr. Carter," a man's voice, formal, careful. "My name is Gerald Simmons. I'm an attorney in Portland. I've been trying to reach you for several days, and I apologize for the unusual timing." A pause. "I'm calling regarding the estate of David Nathaniel Richardson. It has come to my attention through documentation recently filed by St. Mary's Hospital's Genetics Department that you have been established as a biological relative of Mr. Richardson." Another pause. "Mr. Carter, are you aware that David Richardson had a life insurance policy that named in the absence of surviving relatives a secondary beneficiary?" Ethan went completely still. "No," he said. "I was not aware of that." "He updated the policy 8 months ago," Simmons said. "When he and Mrs. Richardson discovered they were expecting a child, the primary beneficiary is Emma Richardson. The secondary beneficiary in the event that additional family is identified through genetic testing, which Mr. Richardson specifically included as a provision. It appears he had been hoping to find biological relatives. The secondary beneficiary is described as any confirmed biological relative identified after the policyholder's death." A pause. "Mr. Carter, David Richardson left a provision in his own life insurance policy for a blood relative he didn't know he had, and you are now that relative." Ethan stared at the concrete barrier. "He put that in there," he said slowly. "He put that in there hoping someone would be found." "Yes, sir. It's an unusual provision. It suggests he never fully gave up on the idea of finding his biological family." Simmons paused. "I don't want to discuss specific figures on the phone, but I do want you to know that this is significant and that there are legal steps we should take to Mr. Carter. Are you still there?" "I'm here," Ethan said. His voice was steady. "Mr. Simmons, I appreciate the call, but I need you to do something for me before we go any further." "Of course. Whatever the provision says, whatever the amount is, I want it redirected to Emma Richardson, to Lily's medical fund, all of it." He paused. "I don't know if that's legally possible. I don't know what the provisions allow, but that's what David would have wanted. I know that without knowing him, and I need you to tell me if it's possible." The attorney was quiet for a moment. "That is yes, with the appropriate waivers and legal documentation that would be possible." His voice had changed slightly, warmer in the way of a formal man encountering something he hadn't anticipated. "I'll draw up the paperwork." "Thank you," Ethan said. He hung up. He sat in the truck for one more minute. The afternoon light came through the windshield at a long angle. the kind of light that exists only in the hours just before evening, gold and slightly heavy. It landed on the crook of his left arm, where the IV had been on the small bandage Renata had placed there, on the hand that had given what Lily needed. His father had never known his brother. His brother's son had put a provision in a life insurance policy hoping someone would be found. And the someone had walked through a wrong door, sung a wrong song, and turned out to be exactly right. He started the truck. He drove home. He called his mother from the driveway, and she answered on the first ring, because she had been waiting, because she was that kind of mother. And he told her all of it, the genetics and the attorney and the provision and what he had asked Simmons to do. She was quiet through most of it, and when he finished, there was a long pause, and then she said, "Your father knew." Her voice was thick. Somewhere in him, Robert knew. He used to say, Ethan, he used to say that the right people find each other eventually, that the universe isn't in the business of losing people forever. She stopped. He would be so proud of you. Ethan sat in the driveway with the engine off and the phone against his ear and didn't try to answer that. He just let it land. He let it sit in him the way the song had sat in him all those years, waiting for the right room, the right moment, the right person to open the door. The call from Karen Yee came on a Wednesday, 11 days after the collection procedure at 6:44 in the morning. Ethan was already awake. He had been sleeping poorly since the donation. Not from pain which had faded by the end of the previous week, but from the particular kind of restlessness that comes from waiting on something you cannot control or hurry. He answered before the second ring. "Dr. Yee." "Ethan." Her voice was different from every other time he had heard it. Not her clinical precision voice, not her careful information voice. Something underneath that, something she normally kept behind the professionalism. "I need you to come in." His chest clenched. "What happened is Lily." "Come in," she said again, and the way she said it told him nothing and told him everything, because it was not the voice of someone delivering a catastrophe, and it was not the voice of someone with nothing to report. In the space between those two things was where he had been living for 11 days. "I'll meet you on the second floor." He was in his truck in 4 minutes. He drove faster than he should have. He parked sideways in a visitor space and didn't care. He was through the front doors and at the elevator before the automatic doors had fully closed behind him, and he stood there pressing the button, like pressing it more would make the elevator arrive faster, which he knew it wouldn't, and pressed it again anyway. Karen Yee was waiting for him when the doors opened. She was standing in the corridor outside the NICU, and the moment he saw her face, he stopped walking. She was crying. Not dramatically. Karen Yee was not a dramatic person, would never be a dramatic person, had spent 18 years in pediatric transplant medicine, building a professional composure that was genuine rather than performed. But her eyes were wet, and she was not trying to conceal it, which meant she had decided this moment was worth letting be what it was. "Tell me," Ethan said. His voice came out lower than he intended. "Her counts came back this morning," Karen said. "We do daily blood work now, post-transplant. We've been watching for engraftment, watching to see if your stem cells are establishing themselves in her marrow, if her body is accepting them." She paused. The pause lasted exactly long enough that Ethan's heart hammered through it in full. "Ethan, her red blood cell production is responding. The engraftment is taking. At this rate—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. Then, "At this rate, we are looking at a successful transplant." The corridor was very still. "She's going to make it," Ethan said. "It's early," Karen said immediately, the physician in her reasserting itself. "We need to watch for rejection, for infection, for any number of things that could still complicate the picture. We are not at the finish line, but we are on the road, and the road is clear, and a week ago I was not sure I could say that." She looked at him directly. "Your cells are in her, Ethan. They're working." Her body accepted them like they were always supposed to be there. He leaned back against the wall. He pressed the back of his head against the cool surface and looked at the ceiling and breathed one long breath, the kind you take when you have been holding something so tightly for so long that releasing it requires a deliberate act. "Does Emma know?" he asked. "I called her 2 minutes before I called you." Karen paused. "She asked me to ask you to come up before you went in to see Lily. She's in the family room on this floor." Ethan pushed off the wall. He went to the family room. He pushed open the door. Emma Richardson was standing in the middle of the room. not sitting standing because she was apparently the kind of person who receives significant news on her feet. She was still in the early stages of her own recovery, still moving with the careful deliberateness of someone whose body was relearning its own geography. But she was standing. She had been at St. Mary's for 3 weeks now, in and out of Lily's NICU room every day, and the hospital had become a kind of terrain she navigated with increasing steadiness, the way a person learns the particular geography of a hard place they have had to inhabit. She looked at him when he came in, and he looked at her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then Emma took 2 steps across the room and put her arms around him. She had never done that before. In 3 weeks of daily visits and hundreds of conversations they had never done that had maintained the careful distance of people who are becoming important to each other, but haven't yet named what that means. She was smaller than he'd realized, or he was taller, or both. Her head came to his shoulder, and he felt the slight tremble in her that she was working very hard to hold still, and he put one hand on her back and just held on. "She's going to make it," Emma said into his shoulder. Her voice was completely steady and completely wrecked simultaneously. "She's actually going to make it." "Yeah," Ethan said. "She is." She pulled back. She looked at him with her face completely open, doing nothing to manage what was on it. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. She had apparently cried already before he got there and had arrived at the other side of it to somewhere cleaner. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know how to be grateful enough for what you did. I've been trying to figure it out for 3 weeks, and I can't get to the end of it." "Then stop trying to get to the end of it," Ethan said. She looked at him. "Just let it be what it is," he said. "You don't have to resolve it into something manageable. Some things are just large." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "David used to say something like that." Her voice was softer now, the way it always went when she moved toward his name. In 3 weeks, he had watched her learn to say David without flinching, the way you learn to use a hand again. After an injury, first carefully, then with more confidence, the pain still there but no longer running the whole operation. He used to say that the things you can't explain are the ones worth paying attention to. "Smart man," Ethan said. "He was," she agreed. "Man. You would have driven each other crazy." "Probably." "He was terrible at directions, absolutely hopeless. He would have walked into every wrong room in this hospital." She almost laughed, the closest thing to a laugh he had heard from her, a small, genuine, slightly broken sound that was better than a polished one. "The two of you would have been wandering the corridors together." Ethan smiled. "Maybe that's how we would have met." Emma looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, something she wasn't quite ready to name, and he wasn't going to name for her. "Maybe," she said. They went to see Lily together as they always did. Greta met them at the NICU door with the expression she wore when things were going right, which was different from her professional expression in a way that Ethan had learned to read over 3 weeks of daily visits. It was a loosening, a small surrender of the vigilant neutrality that competent NICU nurses maintained as standard operating condition. "She's been kicking this morning," Greta said. "Literally kicking. The physical therapist is very pleased." "The physical therapist has been here," Emma said, "since 7. Lily apparently had opinions about the assessment." Greta's expression completed its journey into something that was simply fond. Loud opinions. Emma looked at Ethan. "Her father's daughter," she said, and it landed differently than when she'd said it in the NICU 3 weeks ago, less sharp with grief, more rounded with something that was almost peace. They went in. Lily was awake, which was something she did more of now. Not the fragile, conserving wakefulness of a very sick infant, but a more active, demanding wakefulness, the wakefulness of someone with things on her agenda. She was 8 weeks old and she had survived a car accident and a premature birth and diamond black fan anemia and a transplant and an immune system that had been asked to do extraordinary things in an extraordinarily short amount of time, and she had opinions about all of it, and she expressed them regularly. Emma reached in first, as she always did, and Lily's hand found her finger with that same iron grip, the one that had never wavered from the very first day. Ethan stood beside Emma and looked down at this child, 8 weeks old, still small, but visibly stubbornly growing with dark eyes that were David Richardson's eyes, set into a face that was building itself out of both parents and looking increasingly startlingly like someone specific. "She looks more like him every day," Emma said quietly. The eyes, Ethan agreed, and the forehead, and the way she furrows it when she's annoyed. She watched Lily work the grip on her finger with focused intensity. David used to make that exact face when someone cut him off in traffic. Ethan laughed, a real one, unplanned. Emma looked at him sideways and her mouth curved, and for a moment the room was warm with something that was neither grief nor its absence, but the specific complicated territory between them, where loss and gratitude, and something neither of them had vocabulary for, yet occupied the same space without canceling each other out. Then Greta said from behind them, "There's someone outside who'd like to come in." They both turned. Through the glass panel in the NICU door, Ethan could see Dr. Harold Voss, the man who had stood at the nurse's station 11 days before Ethan ever arrived, and said, "Pull the plug," and called Emma a vegetable, and filed paperwork for resource reallocation, with the specific, efficient indifference of someone who had stopped seeing patients as people. He was standing in the corridor in his white coat, and he was not looking at the door. He was looking at the floor with the posture of a man who has been required to be somewhere he would have preferred not to be. Emma had stiffened slightly. She knew about Voss. Patricia had told her because Patricia believed in informed patients, and also Ethan suspected because Patricia had a carefully maintained professional opinion of Harold Voss that she expressed through strategic disclosure. Emma knew what he had said. She had absorbed it with the particular stillness she brought to things that were too large to react to immediately. "He doesn't have to come in," Greta said, neutral and ready. Emma looked at Lily. Lily was looking at her finger, entirely focused on the important work of holding on. Then Emma said, "Let him in." Greta opened the door. Voss stepped inside. He looked older than his hospital photo, Ethan thought. Or maybe not older, but smaller somehow, the way authority figures shrink when they are separated from the architecture of their authority. He looked at Lily in the incubator, and something moved across his face that he didn't manage to suppress entirely. "Mrs. Richardson," he said. His voice was formal, but not its usual brand of formal. This was the formality of discomfort of a man saying words that cost him something. "I owe you an apology. I owe it clearly and without qualification." He paused. "I made a recommendation 6 weeks ago that prioritized resource allocation over the possibility." He stopped. He looked at Lily again. "I was wrong," he said. "I was wrong, and I am sorry." The room was very quiet. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Ethan watched her decide something, watched her work through it honestly, visibly, the way she did everything. Not suppressing the weight of what Voss had said 6 weeks ago, not minimizing it, but also not letting it be the last thing in the room. "She almost didn't get the chance to be here," Emma said. Her voice was even. "Because of what you said, because of what you were about to do." She held Voss's gaze and he did not look away, which was probably the bravest thing he had done in this hospital in a long time. "I need you to know that I know that. I need you to know that I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen." "I know," Voss said. "And I need you to know," Emma continued, "that the next time you stand in front of a patient who can't speak for themselves, I need you to be a different doctor than you were that night. Not for my sake. For theirs." Voss was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, simply. No argument, no qualification. Just yes. Emma turned back to Lily. "Okay," she said, and that was all. She had said what needed to be said, and she was done with it, and she was back with her daughter, which was where she needed to be. Ethan watched Voss leave, and something in him recognized that the man had walked in one person and walked out slightly different, which was as much as anyone could ask for, and more than most people managed. The day Lily was cleared to leave the NICU came 5 weeks later, on a Tuesday, the same day of the week Ethan realized only afterward that he had first walked through the wrong door. She was 14 weeks old. Her red blood cell counts were stable. Her engraftment was holding. Karen Yee had reviewed her numbers 3 times before signing the discharge paperwork, the way a person checks a locked door 3 times when they have been waiting very long for something to be finally genuinely safe. Emma had been discharged from St. Mary's 4 weeks earlier and was staying temporarily at Helen's house in Salem, while her own apartment was being modified to accommodate a newborn's medical equipment, some monitoring gear that Lily would need for her first months at home. Nothing dramatic, just the ongoing vigilance of careful people, making sure the road stayed clear. Ethan had driven her to Salem because Helen had asked and because Emma had not argued, and they had made the 40-minute drive mostly in a comfortable silence that was different in quality from the silences they had shared in hospital rooms, more spacious. Somehow the kind of silence that exists between people who have moved past the need to fill every gap. The discharge day, Helen came to Portland. Patricia Huang came on her day off in regular clothes with a small stuffed bear that Lily immediately ignored in favor of Patricia's stethoscope chain. Greta carried Lily to the front doors of the NICU herself and handed her formally and with visible emotion to Emma, who received her daughter with both arms and the steadiness of a woman who had learned steadiness from the ground up. Ethan stood off to the side during that handoff. It was not his moment, he knew that without being told. It was Emma's and Lily's and Helen's and Patricia's and Greta's, the moment of a child entering the world that had been waiting for her. But then Emma looked up and found him across the room and she said, "Come here." He crossed to her. She shifted Lily slightly and looked at him with an expression that said, "Here. Here is what we did. Here is what all of it was for." And she held Lily toward him. He had not held her before. He had stood beside the incubator. Dozens of times had looked at her, had talked to her. He had started doing that about 2 weeks and talking to her quietly while Emma was sleeping, or meeting with doctors, telling her inconsequential things. The weather, a baseball score, a story about his grandmother, but he had not held her. He took her now. She was heavier than the imagination of her had been, more solid, more real in his arms than she had been as an idea or a goal or a reason. She looked up at him with David Richardson's dark eyes, furrowed her forehead in David Richardson's particular way, and then settled with the absolute authority of a person who has decided something is acceptable. She made a sound, small, satisfied, like something recognized. Ethan held her and felt the particular quality of the moment press through him, not the sharp feeling of a peak, but something wider and slower, the feeling of a long story arriving somewhere true. He thought of his father, Robert Carter, who had been handed to strangers as an infant and built a life out of love and choice and the people he showed up for. He thought of David Richardson, who had done the same, who had searched for his blood and not found it and decided what he had was enough and was right and left a provision in an insurance policy just in case, just hoping. He thought of a Tuesday night in Portland and a wrong corridor and an open door and a song that was older than any of them. He looked at Emma. She was looking at him, holding her daughter, and her expression was doing something complicated and honest, and he did not look away from it. "What are you going to tell her?" he asked. "When she's old enough, about all of it." Emma thought about it for a moment. "The truth," she said, "that her father loved her so much he used to sing to her before she was born. That her father had a cousin he never got to meet who turned out to be exactly who she needed. That a man walked into the wrong room and sang the right song, and that's how she got to be here." She paused. "And that the universe in her case was paying very close attention." "She'll probably think it's made up," Ethan said. "Probably," Emma agreed. "And then she'll be a teenager and decide it's embarrassing. And then she'll be older and decide it's the most important story she knows." She looked at him. "That's how these things work." He handed Lily back to her mother. Lily objected briefly and then relented, finding Emma's heartbeat with the certainty of someone who knows the sound of home. In the weeks that followed, a shape emerged that none of them had planned. Ethan drove to Salem on Sundays. It started because Helen made dinner and asked him once and then again, and then it became a thing, the Sunday dinner, the table that held Helen and Emma and Lily in her bouncy seat, and Ethan with his coffee, and occasionally Mike, who had adopted the Richardson family with the cheerful aggression of a man who recognized a good thing and intended to be part of it. Patricia came once and stayed for 3 hours and left with Helen's recipe for lamb stew. Greta sent a card on Lily's 3-month birthday that made Emma cry and keep the envelope. Ethan fixed the crack in his windshield. He did not fully know why that felt important, only that it did that something in his life had settled, had found its level, and the cracked windshield that he had been meaning to address for 2 years suddenly seemed like a thing that could and should be addressed. He called the auto glass place on a Tuesday. It took 40 minutes. He drove home with a clear view, and it felt disproportionately like something. He and Emma did not rush anything. That was a choice they made without discussing it, which was the best kind of choice, arrived at the same way from separate directions, and recognized as shared without negotiation. She was still in grief. He was still in wonder. The space between those two states was not empty. It was full of Sunday dinners and honest conversations, and the specific comfort of people who have been through something significant together and do not need to perform ease because they have already found the real thing. One Sunday in October, 4 months after a Tuesday night in Portland that had started as a sprained ankle and a bag of pretzels, Ethan was sitting at Helen's kitchen table after dinner, drinking his third cup of coffee while Helen washed dishes, and Emma sat across from him, feeding Lily with the focused efficiency of a woman who had become very quickly exactly as competent and determined a mother as everyone who knew her would have predicted. Lily finished eating and looked up at Ethan with her dark eyes, and Ethan looked back, and Lily's mouth did something that was not yet a real smile, too early for real smiles, the pediatrician had said. Though Greta had said the pediatrician was wrong because she'd seen it herself, but was something in the direction of one. Something that recognized him and found that acceptable and wanted him to know it. "Hi," he said to her. The same thing he'd said to her mother in a room he hadn't been supposed to be in 6 months ago. Emma watched him watching her daughter. "She likes you," she said. "I like her," he said. "You have her grandmother's fighting to thank for that." "I have a wrong turn to thank for that." Emma smiled. It was a full one, the real unreserved kind that he had been watching arrive on her face in degrees over months, the kind that existed on the other side of tremendous loss when a person has done the work of choosing to be present in their life rather than in their grief. It was the most beautiful thing he had seen in his 32 years, and he did not say so because he didn't need to, because she could see it on his face, and she was Emma Richardson, and she required the truth rather than a managed version of it. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah. Thank you." She said it simply without the 3 weeks of searching for the right frame, just the words clean and direct and meaning everything they contained. For the wrong turn, for the soignon, for Lily, for all of it. He looked at her and at the daughter sleeping in her arms, and at Helen's back at the sink, and at the ordinary Sunday evening, holding all of them, and understood completely, and without remainder, that this was the room he had always been walking toward. He just hadn't known it until he walked through it. "Thank you," he said back, "for opening your eyes." Helen turned off the water. Outside, the October dark was settling over Salem, in the particular way of autumn evenings in the Pacific Northwest, cool and clear, and full of stars that were always there and only visible when everything else went quiet enough to see them. Lily slept. Emma looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back. The Sunday held them all unhurried and complete. Some people spend their whole lives looking for the room where they belong. Ethan Carter found his by walking into the wrong one, and every single thing that happened afterward proved without question that there was no such thing as wrong.